And great to have an opportunity to talk to you folks about some of the things we're doing and how we think about aspects of Visual Studio and the challenges that you as application developers face, which is what we're trying to go and make the product easier and more supportive of you and what you need to do. So the title here says a lot. It's a pretty broad topic that we're going to try to cover, but really what I want to do is also try to thread a little bit of a needle here. You've got Craig tomorrow who's going to talk a lot more about Azure, so I won't spend a lot of time diving deep into Azure. Instead, I'll talk about some of the other trends that we're seeing in the software development space and how they impact you as application developers, and thus how they influence what we do inside of Visual Studio, the .NET framework, and the managed languages to make that easier for you to work with. So to start, there really are kind of two key trends that have really started playing out over the last couple of years that affect software developers. Turns out that hardware devices really aren't that interesting without great software on them. Also turns out that great software is a lot easier to build when you have compelling hardware to target and capabilities of that hardware that you can target and leverage as part of your applications. So the devices trend is really one that has honestly been, I'm sure all of you are feeling the impact of that, whether you're doing consumer-based applications or building software for an organization, for an enterprise, or for a corporation. You're seeing the trend of these devices showing up and people asking for their applications to be run on those kinds of devices. Devices have all kinds of interesting capabilities to them. They can allow you to create richer experiences because they can be location aware, context aware, those kinds of things that really can go and influence the way you design the software experience. The other key trend is the concept of services. At Microsoft, we talk about services all the time. We've been talking about it for a long time as something that we saw as a big trend in the industry. Services obviously play a really key role here in this device world. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but the fact that these devices come in lots of different form factors, people carry multiple of them, the services are one way that allow us to create this rich experience across all those devices, trying to share as much of an experience, as much code and those kinds of things across those devices as possible, but also giving you a place where you can do more intensive compute. You can store information that needs to be available across these devices, across these applications. So those are really the two primary trends that have been influencing us over the last couple of years. They were a big influence in us designing Visual Studio 2012. They continue as we think about how experiences we're creating in the next versions of Visual Studio. So let's dive in a little bit and get into a little more detail about it. So the devices trend is an interesting one. These sort of bubbles show a little bit, or try to depict a little bit, not to scale, of the growth we're seeing in devices. Now, when I talk about devices, most people immediately jump to probably, the smartphone, right? That's one example of something that definitely had a big influence in changing the way we think about things. This device, for those of you in the front can see that I've got a fair amount of gray hair that really started happening when I went to Microsoft. I'm not sure what that means, but this device has probably as much computing power as my laptop definitely at the time I joined Microsoft had. Plus, it's a device that in our pockets actually represents multiple different devices that we used to carry, right? It's a GPS, it's a camera, it's a video player, it's an MP3 player, right? It's all those things plus a general purpose computing device. So it's an interesting device to think about, but not the only one that we think about in the world of business applications. Tablets, another, interesting device that people think about a lot. I see a number of them just sitting out on the tables. I appreciate everybody that's put covers on the back so I don't have fruits staring at me. That doesn't go unnoticed. I appreciate that. But those as another form factor. We also talk about devices just in terms of the kinds of devices that are connected to the internet. Those are all interesting to us. So whether it's, I heard about a device the other day that you can put it in your flower pot and it will tweet you when the pot needs water. You've got devices that people use when they're going out to track their activity when they're trying to exercise, right? Nike's got devices, those kind of things that can go help you just sort of manage your your fitness. You've got all kinds of these devices out there. Turns out that I believe it was about 2008, the number of internet-connected devices exceeded the number of humans on the planet in 2008. Predictions are that by 2020, we'll have over 50 billion internet-connected devices out there. That's just amazing, right? And when you think about it, and you think about the kinds of things we can do with these devices now, it really opens up a lot of really, really interesting opportunities for us. And of course, the best way to go and leverage that is going to be through a set of services that you can use to go and collect this information and work with this information as part of the overall experience of your application users. The other aspect of these devices is that they also allow us to create a rich set of new experiences. I know there's a number of sessions this week where a few folks will be talking about the way they think about modern user experience, modern app experiences. I'll show you some demos today of how we think about that with some of our products, and the fact that you really have to rethink the way you design the user interface of your application for these different form factors. Because let's face it, you're not going to want to sit on this device with this input device, right, your finger, and type a bunch of stuff. That's just not going to work, right? So you got to rethink how you gather the data and how you present the data. So you want things that are more natural, right? We have interesting devices like the Kinect, right, that allow you to really get into motion and interacting in a really natural way that way. The richest applications are connected, right? They're leveraging services in the back end to help make the experience richer, to help share information, allow you to pick up, where you left off when you switch devices and those kinds of things. And of course, people also want it to be personal. I think this is something that we've seen as a result of the consumerization trend, the fact that everyone has one of these devices, a lot of them with the fruit on the back, that has a really rich user experience, and that's really upped the bar for what our customers, your customers, expect from their application experience. The old green screen, character-based terminals, yeah, that's probably not going to cut it anymore for someone that's used to the really rich, immersive, interactive experience that they get on their consumer device. And that's something that we have to, as application developers, understand and address. And that's what I consider part of my job, is to give you the tools to make that straightforward and easy to do. So I mentioned that they've got all these devices and they come in all kinds of factors. What does that really mean? Well, it means as a development organization inside of a company, inside of an organization, you have to think about the fact and acknowledge you're going to need to have a multi-device strategy, right? It used to be the machine you used at work was the machine we gave you. They probably had one or two, maybe three different models that you knew were going to exist in the organization. They were all typically PC form factors or laptop form factors. So you knew what was on the people's desk. You knew what versions of software they had. You could reliably understand, okay, this is what version of a browser they have. This is what version of the operating system, version of Office, those kinds of things. You had a lot more, the IT organization had a lot more control over what that was, which meant you as software developers had a lot more that you could just assume about the environment your software was going to run. Today, that's not the case. We know there were some studies late last year that varying ranges of, but anywhere in the 80 to 88% range, people are coming back saying they use a personal device as part of their workday to accomplish their work task. They bring in their own device and they're using their own device. We also heard that somewhere around 75% of those folks said that it is a critical, mission critical part of accomplishing their job is the ability to use their personal device for work. Now, I get the opportunity in my job to spend some time with execs in briefings, so CIOs and so forth, that the big accounts that come to Microsoft for a couple days. And one of the things that is kind of fun, I do this on behalf of you guys, is to say that the multi-device strategy really, typically I see starts with those C-level execs who show up one day with their iPad and go to the IT guys and say, hey, I want all my software to run on this. And they don't quite understand why we look at them and go, yeah, that's fine. It's going to be a few years. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And they, so we spend some time talking about it. They usually give me dirty looks, but afterwards the development managers in the group usually come and thank me for at least setting the record straight. But that's what happens, right? The execs come in and they say, I want my stuff on this device. It's beautiful, it's light, so we have to think about that. lots of ways to go deal with it. It brings in lots of challenges. They have different form factors, from phones to tablets. They have different operating systems. Even the operating systems that are named the same tend to be very different in some cases. So all this stuff, we got to think about, okay, what's our strategy? How do we approach this? How do we go about creating an environment where we can be successful as software developers, meet the needs of our end users by providing them software and the devices they want, and maintain our sanity in the process, right? And maybe some sense of life as well outside of work, not be doing software development all the time. So how do we do that? Well, that's one of the things that influences us in Visual Studio, and there's a couple patterns that we see people follow. You either basically go for a completely native experience, right? So you're building using the native technology, native framework on the device. So it's Objective-C on iOS, it's Java on Android, and it's a kind of WinRT-based solution on the Microsoft stack. Or you go the other extreme, which is you just do a complete browser-based experience. Go for the lowest common denominator experience, HTML, JavaScript kind of approach, and try to get it to work across all the different browser devices that you're going to encounter and so forth, maybe leveraging some underlying frameworks that are emerging in the ecosystem, like things like jQuery, jQuery Mobile, those things to help you out. Or you try to find a spot in the middle where people do what they typically refer to as the hybrid approach, where I typically refer to this as the player model. You have a native app that is the shell that was written in the native technology stack, and then you're playing basically HTML kind of content through that app, or you're doing some kind of dynamic app generation. So it's a little bit of a hybrid experience. You can get at native experiences of the underlying device because of that native shell, and then you have just common stuff running through it. So those are really the three approaches that people take. And I'll show you in a minute a little bit of how we've gone and approached one of those in a really straightforward and easy way for folks to leverage. The other aspect that we need to think about this is, okay, so if we've got these multiple devices, how do we think about our overall application architecture strategy? Of the millions and millions of professional developers out there, we do typically fall into two categories. Those that are working on and continuing to enhance and develop existing application architectures that look a lot like the image on the left, sort of that client-server or slight variation of that client-server experience, where the client is typically a Windows-based PC connecting up to a database, or maybe a middle-tier application server that's got some of our logic in it, right? The classic N-tier architecture. The other set of us are been plunged into this world of devices and services, where we have service-based experiences, potentially even service-first, that are serving up the majority of our application logic across all devices. Sometimes this is in the form of really rich, dynamic, HTML5, JavaScript-based web apps. Other times it's, open web API kinds of interfaces that are consumed by native applications running on these individual devices. And understanding that each device probably has a tailored experience based on the form factor, interaction patterns, and so forth of that device. So that's really kind of the way we find ourselves, and that's really where we're seeing more and more people need to shift, are starting to have to shift into this devices and services world, this service-first kind of experience when they're creating new applications. That said, I spent the first 12 years of my career building applications that look like they do on the left. And a lot of them, I'm a little scared to realize this when I go visit customers I used to work with, that they're still in production. Because, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So we understand that that's a model that we need to continue to support because you need to continue to support it. And we are thinking about how do we help you, modernize is a typical phrase that you hear a lot. Modernize those applications when it's appropriate. When you have something where, okay, we're pushing the boundaries of what we can accomplish with this architecture. Maybe we do need to go, introduce a device client onto one of these. Okay, how do we go and evolve that application and that application pattern in a way that we can support these new requirements, but not have to go file new and completely start over from scratch? Because no development manager, well, okay, development managers might, but no exec understands, well, what do you mean it's going to take you 2 years to go recreate just what I had, right? That doesn't usually work out very well. So those are things that are influencing how we go and design the products, the experiences we create, not only in Visual Studio, but things that my team thinks about in terms of capabilities we add to the managed programming languages, so VB, C#, F#, as well as what we would do in the CLR and .NET framework to help support these new kinds of patterns that are evolving. Okay, so it's early in the morning, extremely early in the morning for me. That's a lot of slides so far, so I figured, why don't we go spend some time in the product? Let's take a look at a little bit of these experiences, specifically around how we deal with an experience for creating business applications in this multi-device, device and cloud, device and service kind of world. So with that, I'm going to switch over here to Visual Studio. And what I've got here is this is Visual Studio 2012, a little bit clipped at the top, but that's okay. You don't need to see those menus up there. You can see most of what we need. What I've done here is I've got Visual Studio 2012, and I've got the latest update. My slide's actually out of date. It said update 2. I actually got brave and installed update 3 last night. It's safe. These updates are great. And update 3 is a little bit smaller than update 2 was, so I know it's a lot safer. But what I've done here is I've created, I've just gone and done a file new. So let me go pull up what I did. I just went in and it said file, file, new project. And what you'll see is starting with just Visual Studio 2012, the release, we included Visual Studio Light Switch as part of the core product install for professional, premium, and ultimate customers. With update 2, we've included the ability to create an HTML application as part of your Light Switch solution. Just out of curiosity, quick show of hands, how many folks are familiar with Light Switch? Unfortunately, it's like the best kept secret we have inside of Visual Studio. So let me show you a little bit about it. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've said, okay, file new project, and I created an HTML Light Switch app, and that's what we have here. Light Switch is our experience inside of Visual for building data-centric business applications. What we found, what I learned doing this a lot, prior to coming to Microsoft, and what we continue to find to be true is that core business applications, line of business apps, really have 3 main components. There's the data, right? They're all about reading data, often reading and writing data. There's the UI that you actually put up to have someone interact with it. And then there's that custom business logic that actually is why you created a custom app, right? It's the implementation of your custom rules to your organization. So that's what these apps are made up of. Now, it turns out that if you look at the time we spend building one of these apps, the value is in the unique business rules. But all of our time as app developers is usually spent in the stuff that doesn't actually provide the unique value. Getting data in and out of a database, getting a service put up in front of it, designing a UI, right? Which, by the way, we tend to have 3 or 4 UI patterns we use in all of our business apps, and we just do them over and over and over again, right? So it's all of that time we put in, and then very little left for actually going and doing the custom rules. So we wanted to create an experience that would really flip that on its head, allow your time to be spent in relation to where the value of the app is, so spending the time on the custom logic. So with this experience, we drive it based on the data. We can create data, so I can go in here and I could define new data entities, which really are translating into tables, right, in a relational database. Or I can consume data that's already available to me in my organization. And I can actually do both inside of the same app. Since it's a Keynote, I'm going to go with the attached to external data approach, just so it gives us a little bit more interesting thing to look at. You see what we've done is we really support 4 primary ways of us consuming existing data. There's just straight relational database, anything we can talk to with an entity framework provider. We can go and consume data from SharePoint lists and document libraries. It turns out lots of interesting information is getting stored in SharePoint lists and document libraries. We also, with this release, support the ability of just consuming a general OData service. So OData is just a RESTful protocol for consuming data, XML-based data. And then, custom-built WCF-REA services. In my case, we're going to go with a database, just to make this fun, because no demo is fun without requiring live internet connections. We're going to go and consume data from SQL Azure. So I've got a SQL Azure database up there that you can tell because of that funky name. And we'll go and just connect up to that. Go in and pick our database, say OK. And now what we're going to do within Light Switch is based on the credentials that we were given, we're going to go query that database the metadata for the database, and find out what objects are available to me with those credentials to go and consume. And we see a set of tables and views come back. We'll pop down the tables here, and let's just do something basic. We'll maybe grab customers and some sales order information. We'll say finish, and what LightSwitch is now going to do is actually go create a data model over that database. And you see it's now popped up over here, and we've got our, our data sitting in our solution. We see our information. We've just gone and looked at the core schema of the database, looked at relationships we have, and so forth. One of the things we've added to this experience is the fact that, okay, there's business applications. There's a set of data types that we know are kind of common in a business application world, even though they're stored as a very generic data type under the covers. So for example, if I scroll down here, we see things like email address, right? Email address, you're going to store that in a database as a string, right? But if I know it's an email address, we can provide some default presentation and validation logic on top of that for you, right? Just to give you a richer experience. Same thing for a phone number, right? I can go down and, if I say, okay, this is actually a phone number, we can do some interesting things with it. We can also go and decide, are there specific formats of a phone number that we want to allow versus not? So you see we've defaulted a bunch. You can add your own. You can remove the ones that you don't want to support, those kinds of things. And these are all just going to go put default validation logic on top of that underlying data. We can go in, we can do some other things here, just sort of hint at additional descriptions of things that maybe we don't, really care to actually ever see in UI, for example. Like those kind of things. We don't really want somebody ever to see those probably in our UI. The other thing we can do is we can define some things based on the UI, the clients that we're going to create, and set some values there. So in this case, if I switch to the client view of the model, we'll see we have some other things that we can specify, like what's the default summary value. If I'm only going to show the customer as a single line item, what do I want to show? Probably not the title. We do our thing where we try to guess based on the data types, and sometimes we guess wrong. But maybe it's the company name is actually what I want to display by default, those kinds of things, right? So all we're doing here is we're really just creating a model of the data and enriching that model to give LightSwitch a little bit more information about how we want to use it and things we want to do. Once I've created that model, once I've done with the data, the next thing I need to do is actually go create some UI. So we'll go over here and we'll just add a screen to our client. Here's where we took one of our first pretty big departures from the traditional Visual Studio business app or app development experience. We leveraged and embraced the fact that there are UI patterns that are common in these business apps, and we drive the app creation based on those patterns. So you typically have a screen where you may be looking for some data, and then you're going to drill in and work with it. So there's a browse screen, a view detail screen. Maybe you have other screens where you're either editing or adding information to the database or to a table. So those are some common patterns that we see, and that's what we've driven the UI experience off of. So let's go create a browse screen. All we'll do is specify what data we want. We can leave the default name there. We'll say OK. And now what we're going to do is we have this model-based view, this view model basically of what we've got. Let me just go ahead and hit run here, and let's see what we've got at this point. Just doing some basic clicking and describing a little bit of what we intend with our application. So what's been happening, by the way, I should have mentioned this, is under the covers, what we've done is we've created a kind of device and services solution for you. We have a data model that's represented via the entity framework. We have a service layer that is an OData service that contains my business logic and access to my data and just exposes that over a RESTful API. And then this is a rich HTML, JavaScript-based client that is calling that service and interacting with it. And so this one is not too interesting. We see that, okay, on a PC-like device, we're not making really good use of the real estate. We got a big bar here with very little information on it. If I go down to let me move this around a little bit so you can see it. If I went down to something like this, maybe that's what a tablet kind of interface would look like. A little better, still a lot of real estate that we're not taking advantage of. And that maybe is what my phone might look like rendering this thing, right? Okay, so that's quite a bit better, but still, there's probably richer information I want. Another thing that's interesting, since it's popping in there, I'll show you, we spent a lot of time when we designed this to ensure that the things we created as part of this, the HTML and JavaScript that was created, was human, understandable, readable, and workable, right? So in the background, you see I have the DOM Explorer, which is the core Visual Studio experience. When I say select element, what I can do is I can go in here, click on this, and we can see exactly where in the HTML and the DOM stream that element came from. And you'll notice that, okay, sure, there's a few more divs than you probably would have hand-coded, but you can understand what's going on in here, right? It's not like some other tools that try to do this where you just know that was clearly generated by some kind of code generator and no one's ever going to go look at it. These are actually in there. You see it's all got a lot of style sheet based stuff, so you can go and really easily reskin these things. All right, but we were talking about how the UI doesn't really scale all that well and make the best use of stuff. So let's go switch this a little bit. And rather than a list, let's use something like a tile. And now we'll just specify what information we want to display on our tile. In this case, let's just have the company name and maybe the email address and phone number of the primary contact, and we'll delete that other one. When I run it this time, what we'll see is that rather than just a flat kind of simple list, we're going to have more of a tiled list view with more information on each individual customer showing up. So in this view, we see that, okay, we're a little bit small, so we only got one. When I go bigger, okay, now we've got two. When I go to full sort of desktop screen, now we've got a lot, right? So we're actually doing a much better job of taking advantage of the viewport that we have. Under the covers, we are sniffing the viewport size of the device, so we understand how to lay some things out. We expose that to you as an app developer, so if you want to get in and do even more customization, you certainly can as part of the experience. I'm going to do one more thing here just to show you a little bit more of what we can do. Let's go add one more screen. We'll add a details screen, so we'll just view some details of our customer. You'll see that when we do a view kind of screen, we also can expose any of the related data as well. So if we want to see the customer and their orders, we could certainly do that. We'll just do the customer. We'll kind of leave it just as the default for now, but let me go back to our browse screen and say, okay, what I want to have happen here is whenever anybody taps, right, because this is designed for a device, it's designed as a touch-based experience. When somebody taps on something, I want an action to happen. And specifically what I want to do is I want to go and show that view customer. I want to show the detail screen for that customer, and I want it to default to the selected one, right? So we're just setting up a little binding there. So now when I run this, assuming I did that correctly, which I should have because it's pretty straightforward, we'll see that not only am I viewing data from the database, and let me actually do this real quick so you can see something else that's cool. Notice the scroll bar, right? We try to implement a number of best practices for you, like paging. So this is built as a touch-centric thing. Right now, my laptop has a sticker on it that says Windows Vista, so it's kind of old. So I can do this all day long, and it's not going to do anything. But the best way I can show you how we've done virtual scrolling is if I take this and I just bang it all the way down, you'll see, we're loading more data, right? And the scroll bar popped up. We're loading more data, right? Because the virtual scrolling paging is kicking in, right? So we're not doing everything from the database. We're trying to do some of those best practices on your behalf, right? As part of the development experience. We've done that. The thing I really want to show you was, okay, now I can go and I can click on somebody and I can see the details, right, for that customer. If I wanted to make this an edit screen, we could have had edit boxes pop up instead, and I would have had a save button and all those kind of fun things. So what you saw, though, is that in just a few minutes, I was able to get up the basic structure of my application, reading and writing data from the database, some UI patterns and so forth, without having to go spend time actually writing any of that code, right? Because that's just the common boilerplate stuff. Once we get further in here, we have lots of experiences where we can go implement our custom logic. So in the data tier, behind that service, I can write code that interacts with data as it's going in and out of the database. All right, I can implement my logic, whether I'm doing something when it's being inserted, before it's gone to the database, after it got inserted to the database, updated, and so forth. I just go in and write, if I do inserting, right, I can just now write just some standard, Visual Basic or C# code here that's going to execute on my server. In the client, I have the same set of sort of experiences around when individual screens are being loaded and so forth. I can actually get in if I wanted to. Let's go over to a client and just show you. If I wanted, well, actually, let's do the browse one. That's better. If I wanted to, when I go select this tile list thing, you see that I have these methods where I could take control. If I go in the post-render event, this basically says, okay, we've done what we thought was necessary for the template. Here it is. If you want to go continue modifying those elements, go for it, right? And you can style it however you want, pull in, whatever kinds of experiences you want. You pull in your own, jQuery mobile controls, those kinds of things, and completely take over this experience, whether it's at an individual field level, an entire screen, whatever, right? So trying to give you the flexibility there and a pattern for interacting with this stuff based on your individual application needs. When you're done with the app, it's now time to actually go make it available to folks. We give you the experience of actually deploying this application, and what we support are a couple different models. We're deploying an end-tier application in this case, right? So we can either go to IaaS, that could be on-prem or a hosted, a hosting partner. Of course, we love it when people go and deploy to Azure, right? And then if we choose the Azure route, we can go and do the whole settings experience. I've got my machine already connected to my account, so we'll go query the account, and we'll have the ability to either go use the Azure websites, right? The really fast, lightweight website database sort of compute container, or the full cloud service model where you have a web role and a SQL Azure database as well, and just continue working through these experiences, asking you the various questions. One of the things I'll do is I'll go back and say IIS real quick, just show you kind of an interesting thing we do here. For on-prem or IIS deployments, we know that the developer, you don't always have the ability to deploy or credentials to deploy to the server. So we'll also give you the option of creating a package on disk, right? This is just a web deploy package, standard web deploy package that your admin can look at, pick apart, whatever they want to do. The thing that's also interesting is if we go and do the publish now option and go a little bit further and see the database, oh, we didn't attach, sorry. Because we didn't attach database, we're giving you the option of going in and changing, is there a different database you want to point me at? Maybe you're using the development version. If we created a database, you'd see we prompt you for 2 credentials. The one that can create the database and the one you want your app to use. Hopefully they're different, but that's sort of a hint to go, oh, they're asking me for 2, maybe I should have them be different, right? Those are just some of the things we're trying to do to help you create robust applications. And you can switch your mind whenever you want. You can switch these different deployment models. It's not a big deal. Works with Team Foundation Service and Server. You can do builds in the background, so you can get a complete continuous integration, continuous delivery cycle going with this as well, where dev checks in, build kicks off. If the build succeeds, tests succeed, we push to the next environment that you want, your test or staging environment. Okay, there's probably more time than I intended to spend there, but since you hadn't seen it. I know there's a couple sessions later in the week that go into more detail on LightSwitch, so I encourage you to check those out. The team's got a pretty good blog with lots of good, helpful tips. So that's some things we're doing there. One of the things that's interesting about this is, so we took the web app approach, the standards-based web app approach. So this will work great on iOS, works great on recent Android devices, works awesome on Windows devices, right? From the same code base, trying to give you a little bit of experience for dealing with these different viewport sizes, right? That's workable. Not ideal, but it's not going to be the best experience on the phone and the best experience on the tablet, but it should be good across both. I also tried to add some telemetry in here as well for you, so you can get a better sense of what kind of devices are actually consuming your app. So you can make decisions about optimizing for one device and or OS family over another if you needed to. So trying to help you with that cycle a bit. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about sort of what this sort of new cloud app model really kind of does for us. So we're thinking about devices and services and putting more and more of your core logic into a service, into a back-end compute. And I'm actually going to use Office and SharePoint as the way of describing this. If you're not familiar with Office and SharePoint development, in the new Office and SharePoint 2013, it is completely different from what the experience used to be. Those of you that have done Office and SharePoint development, you probably had that feeling where you were making a career decision to go start targeting Office and SharePoint because the object models were so deep and rich, and the approaches you took were just so unique to Office and SharePoint. We'd tell people, hey, SharePoint development is just ASP.NET. That is completely true. If you've never done ASP.NET development, you don't know what ASP.NET development is, and you think that's what it is. If you have, this is no ASP.NET development you've ever done before in the past. With 2013, we've completely changed that. We turned the thing kind of inside out, basically, where now instead of having your extensions, your components plug into the process of Office or the process of SharePoint, we opened up the Office products and SharePoint and exposed the rich set of services that they offer to application developers to consume. And we exposed them via standard REST-based APIs. So now rather than going and saying, oh, I want to go and leverage a document library and kick off a workflow, and that's great, so I'm going to build a SharePoint app to do that, and having that deployed on the SharePoint farm, right, on the SharePoint servers, you instead can write just a web-based app, standard ASP.NET web-based app, that consumes and pushes information to and from a document library that can cause a workflow to be kicked off, and your code is running on your own server somewhere, whether it's IIS on-premise, Azure, whatever, and the whole thing can be packaged up as an app. The other thing they did is they embraced the app concept with SharePoint and Office. So you can now deploy these things as apps. They have a public marketplace, but for business users, they have an even more interesting thing, which is a corporate marketplace that just comes as part of your SharePoint install. So now you can go and deploy the apps to the corporate environment. They can then be acquired by individual site owners. You can push them to sites if you want to, and you get a basic management experience of the app. You know where they're deployed. You know how many users are using them. You can do interesting licensing and chargeback things if you want to on top of that, giving you more control of that experience, all just while embracing standard web-based technologies. So that's the big change they made. The other way to think about it is sort of the way they now shift that hosting model, right? So rather than the code running on the SharePoint box or running in the Office client process, it's running off box. It's running on another machine somewhere. That machine could be the client, in the case of the bottom version here, where we just call it the SharePoint hosted app, where all you have is HTML and JavaScript making up your app. So we're just serving those files. They're running on the client in the browser, right? Or in the case of server compute, we have these two models where either auto-hosted, when you declare that you need, server code and you need a database, when the app is instantiated, SharePoint will go look at the package, say, oh, you need some server compute and you need a database. Let me reach into my Azure stamp, provision you a website and a database, deploy the app into it, connect it to your app, and hand it back to you, right? So in that case, SharePoint manages that entire deployment pipeline. Today, this only works for O365. In the future, we will look at how we can make that work on-prem so that you can basically just declare, here's my IIS server configured that way and my SQL server, and we'll go manage those for you. The one above, you're basically saying, no. As the app developer, I'm going to control what happens on the server and database. So there's one server, one database, or, you can have multiple, but one logical server and database, and all instances of the app point to that. So I think of it as bring your own server kind of idea. And this can be anything. It can be Azure with your own subscription. It can be your own on-prem. This is the on-prem experience that you'd have today. It can be a hosting partner. It can be anything, right? And now you are responsible for any interesting multi-tenancy or other work you do. But those are the models that are supported. The key is the stuff that's in the blue boxes is just standard web technology. ASP.NET, you can do LAMP, you can do whatever you want, PHP, whatever Ruby, whatever you want back there is going to be fine as long as you can talk to these RESTful services. The green layers, okay, yeah, you have a HTML and JavaScript layer there. You have a JavaScript object model that is significantly smaller than it used to be to make it easier to call these services and interact with things. So let's take a look at a little bit of how to go do that if you haven't seen it before. And again, I know there's sessions later in the week about this. So I'm going to show you two things. The first is what we call kind of the getting started experience. So if you've never done, no thanks. If you haven't done this yet, you can go and sign up for a developer account in Office 365. So you go to dev.office.com and you can sign up, and it gives you a full instance of Office 365 that's constrained only by the number of concurrent users that you can use for development purposes. So you got Exchange, and you will have Yammer, and you got SharePoint, you got all those cool services back there. So I've already done that. When you do that, you get this, your developer site. And let me make this a little easier for you guys to see all of. This is just a site with a specific template on it. And one of the things we have in here is this app. It's an app for building apps. And And so what I can do is, without installing anything on my machine, no Visual Studio, no Office, no nothing, I can start trying out this experience of building these new style of apps. So I can build an app for SharePoint. Let's do an Excel thing, because that's a little bit more fun. So we'll create a content app for Excel. What we're going to get here is a browser-based experience for doing the HTML and JavaScript app. So you see we've got just some standard HTML. If I go in the scripts, you'll see that I've got some basic, just getting started kind of scripts here that show you how to interact with data in the document from your extension. This is a fairly rich experience. I will admit, I myself was pretty surprised at what we can actually do in here. We get completion lists, right? We get matching of braces and types and elements. So we can do interesting stuff. The part of the team that builds this experience using this experience, right? So these guys that build this spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day doing JavaScript development inside this browser-based experience. So it's relatively rich. But what I can do is I can just go ahead and hit run. And what we'll do is we'll package up this app, we'll deploy it back into your developer instance, and then we will launch it for you. And in this case, we're going to use the Excel web client. So this is all just how quick Office 365 wants to be today. There we go. So we'll go ahead and launch that. And we see the Excel web app is going to load here. It's going to load my extension, which is a content app, which will show up right here. And so when I say write, it's going to put hello there. When I say yes live and say read, right, it's going to grab that back. So it's interacting with that Excel content, right, just from that app. Since I have Excel on this machine, I can say open in Excel. And we should see the same document will now open in the Excel rich client with that same extension on it. And have the same capabilities. So one of the other things we've done as part of this new model, I have to sign in. This may cause us a bit of a problem. Yeah. Maybe not. So we get the same app. What we've done is we've created these object models. These JavaScript object models are significantly smaller than the old COM-based object models were. And in fact, they're also symmetric. So when we do a content app, we can do the content app. That same app can work whether it's Excel or Word, because cells in Excel look like cells of a table in Word, for example, or content looks like content. Task panes are task panes. So not only do they work in the web and the rich client, but they also can work across Office clients if you want that to happen, right? So we can, we can do the write and the read thing in the Excel as well. We can do the same thing for SharePoint, all that kind of fun stuff. If you notice, when I go back over here, one of the other options I can do is I can click this button right here that says Open in Visual Studio, and now I can pull this whole project down to Visual Studio and start continuing to work with it just like a Visual Studio project. I think a way to give you a little bit better example here is of how this is really just web development. I'm going to switch over to a different project that I was working on. And what you see here is this solution's got two projects in it. It's got the SharePoint project, this is a SharePoint app, that really only contains the manifest, which is the description of the app, like the name, what rights does it need, mine doesn't need any, right, those kinds of things. And then a web project. So this is a standard MVC project, right, that is the real meat of the app. If I look at it and look at default, you'll see that I'm using Razor and stuff like that, and I'm just going and querying a database to grab some product information and displaying that. If I run this one, we should see is we're going to go, Visual Studio is going to do its thing. It's going to go package it up. It's going to deploy it to my same remote Office 365 instance. So there's another key. If you do SharePoint development, this model allows us to do it remotely. You don't have to have SharePoint on your machine anymore. That usually gets applause from SharePoint folks. All right, it's early. I'll give it to you. I will log in. You see that what's happening first is we get a trust prompt. Do you trust this app? Yes, I do. Let me make this a little bigger. We're now going to install that app on my developer site. And now because we're doing development, we launched from F5, you'll notice that up here in the top, we've redirected using service bus back to my local machine so I can do rich debugging, right? Locally, I can hit breakpoints and step through things, even though the app got served out of my Office 365 account in the cloud. And now we can go and we just have a standard web app that is sitting inside of SharePoint, right? So if I go back to site, you'll see I'm going to be back on my home site, my developer site, right? So that whole experience. Oh, and there's more. The light switch experience. Bring up the properties here. I could deploy that light switch app as a SharePoint app as well. So I could say enable SharePoint, and it's going to prompt me for my SharePoint site. And now when I F5 the app this time, all that would be different is you'd see it sitting inside the Chrome of my Office 365 site. So I can build these SharePoint apps using light switch as well. So the whole thing kind of comes a little full circle for us there. But you guys will trust me on that one. So we've talked a little bit about an approach for dealing with multiple devices and an experience for that. We've talked about looking at, hopefully this made sense of looking at this cloud service-based model of putting more content in the service and less on the specific devices, using the SharePoint and Office example. The last thing we'll talk about just briefly is the fact that in addition to apps being modernized and having a new way of thinking about them, the entire life cycle with which we build the apps has also evolved. Lots of folks have probably heard the build, measure, learn concept, right? The idea that app development really is, we're acknowledging it's really been this kind of continuous loop, right? Agile, all these keywords, buzzwords you hear about, agile, continuous integration, continuous delivery, build, measure, learn, all of those things really are just trying to say that, hey, what we do is we go talk to an end user or a customer, we get some requirements, we build based on that, we build, test, and so forth, we push it out, our customer then realizes what they really wanted us to build, so we put that in the backlog, we go iterate, and we go loop again, right? So that was always a cycle. What this is acknowledging is that now with these services, we have an extra component, which is the actual operation of the service. And the rich set of data we can gather from the service that also feeds into the design and enhancements of the product going forward. We can learn what people are actually doing with the product. That browser-based experience for creating SharePoint and Office apps, we call it Napa right now. We have rich telemetry behind that service, so we know in an anonymous way what people are actually doing with that. So we know, oh, we added this feature, and suddenly we see that the time spent in the site has gone up 75%, right? Or we enabled statement completion, and the size of projects has doubled now because people are writing more code in the browser before going to Visual Studio or something like that. Doing those kinds of things, understanding where the real errors are, getting the real dumps, so you don't have it crashed and you're going through that continuous loop of what crashed, where were you, what machine you were, like gathering that kind of information. The acknowledgement that the days of, in this world, the days of developers building the solution, getting to throw it over the wall to the IT guys who then run it, are quickly going away, right? Developers building services find themselves getting woken up at 2 in the morning when the service doesn't work anymore, because they're really the only ones that can fix it. The IT guy probably can't fix it. It's probably not just a network problem. It probably is an app problem. So how do we go and get you, an experience there that you can use to actually go support that full modern life cycle of gathering rich information, being able to respond to events that happen, feeding all of that into your continuous sort of app life cycle. Of course, our solution for that is the Team Foundation Server and Team Foundation Service. If you aren't familiar with it, or haven't used it yet, oops, wrong one. One of these is my, there you go. Team Foundation Service, which you can't see, is the hosted version of Team Foundation Server. So you can go out, you can go create projects here. Up to 5 people, it's a free account. Once you go over 5, then you have to start, we'll start charging you for it. But you can do the full management of your solution. You get full backlog, so I can go in, if I want to go into my sprint planning, I can actually go and see all the work either via sorry, let's make this a little smaller again. Either via work items or looking at the backlog and the, the fun sprint board kind of stuff, so we can visualize what folks are doing. We can look at our code. So that same editor experience, we don't allow editing right in here, but we have the viewing experience, so I can go, browse and look at code that way, look at change sets. We also have the build servers now hooked up, so I can go and enable these continuous integration, continuous delivery builds in the cloud. So when someone checks in, builds happen, tests run, and we push it from environment to environment based on those rules and so forth, all from within a cloud-based service. Same thing's available on-prem, has been for a while. We're just kind of offering it now in this cloud-based experience. And of course, the thing that was big news, well, about a year or earlier this year, was the fact that we, in addition to supporting Team Foundation's server as the source control, this experience also supports using Git as, if you're a distributed source control person, you can hook us up to Git, and we can do the same lifecycle management experiences, but now using a Git distributed version control repository. So, with that, so hopefully this was interesting and gave you sort of some insights into how we think about things, the trends that we're seeing in application development, how that's influencing what we're doing in Visual Studio and in the framework and in our tools. Hopefully it also gave you a little bit of a tour around some of the other content that is here available to you the rest of this week to help you figure out where you want to maybe deep dive a little bit into the actual details of some of these things. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your time. You've been a great audience. Always great to come back to Chicago.